The gift of the Eucharist and the gift of the priesthood all at once. All at once. Who are we that we should deserve such gifts? And the answer is simple. We are God's beloved, and we want to listen to Him. We don't deserve anything, but because we are His beloved, God treats us like priests, like Eucharistic people. So great is His love for us. Now, tonight, we focus on the Lord's institution of the Eucharist, the sacrifice of the Eucharist, the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, all of which are made possible by the priesthood. Now, we know that for a while there was some confusion about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. The presence in the tabernacle was referred to as the static presence of Christ. And the presence of Christ on the altar during the Eucharist was referred to as the dynamic presence of Christ. Christ Himself, fully alive, risen from the dead. How on earth could that presence ever be called static? People almost thought that Jesus on the altar was jumping around, and in the tabernacle He was sleeping. So I think we cleared that aside. But now, we have a problem which is in a way more grave. That is, many Catholics don't really believe in the real presence. They want to, they intend to, they're good-hearted, they say they do, but then we watch what happens when so many come to communion. Sometimes it gets so bad that somebody right before they receive or right after will go and share some words with a friend in the front pews, when the Lord of heaven and earth is either still in their hand or still in their mouth. Now, nobody would treat Prince William like that on his wedding day. How about the Lord of heaven and earth? Nobody means anything bad. Nobody means anything irreverent. But if people act in a certain way, we have to say they couldn't really believe it. And they intend to believe it, and they want to believe it. So we don't want to condemn them. We want to help them out. We want to help them to get where they intend to be and where they want to be. And that's where the beautiful story of the washing of the feet comes in. We hear in the second reading, and we hear on Palm Sunday, the narrative of the institution of the Eucharist, which we will be able to represent by God's grace in just a little while. But we also hear tonight that the Last Supper, the Eucharistic occasion, was also marked by the washing of the feet. The signs of bread and wine are what the risen Christ looks like in the reality of this sacramental mystery of the Eucharist. The washing of the feet is what we could call the prime example of Eucharistic behavior, of Eucharistic living. There is celebrating the Eucharist, there is adoring the Eucharist, and then there is Eucharistic living. Living the Eucharist when we leave here. And I think that many people have a problem believing in the real presence these days because they're not engaged in the Eucharistic behavior. If they could get the Eucharistic behavior part of it down, the reverence for the real presence would show. If they had reverential service as their attitude toward others, they would have far deeper reverential service as their attitude toward Christ. That, I think, is where the problem is. I looked out the window yesterday morning, just as I was thinking something through, and what did I see? Something very beautiful. One developmentally disabled person was pushing another developmentally disabled person in a wheelchair. Jesus watched the apostles' feet, and then he told them to go out and wash others' feet, especially each other's feet. So the priests have a way of washing feet as their Eucharistic behavior in the Catholic community. Their role of service, especially the service of the truth, and then the people should go out and live out their Eucharistic behavior in precisely that kind of service, where in a way that's truly caring, they help one another. Not just to look good to others, not because maybe in some instances they're being paid, but they do it because they really care. The Eucharistic behavior, the washing of the feet, in the many forms it takes, as in the two developmentally disabled people, so real. That Eucharistic behavior is necessary for the proper attitude of Eucharistic reverence at Mass and at Eucharistic adoration. You can't have one without the other. The idea of static and dynamic presence is almost self-contradictory. Christ fully alive is dynamic, always and everywhere. And there cannot be real adoration of the Eucharistic presence, real celebration of the Eucharistic sacrifice without the Eucharistic behavior. And if that Eucharistic behavior is lacking, that attitude of being ready to wash the feet of the other, if that's lacking, then the faith in the real presence at Mass and at adoration will inevitably dim. Because that faith is incomplete without the Eucharistic behavior part of it. Now, most here are well known for their deep faith in the Eucharist, accompanied by Eucharistic behavior. And that's all wonderful, but what we have been given as a grace, we've got to give. The faith in the real presence at Mass and adoration is only going to grow for people if they make the connection between that faith and the Eucharistic behavior, which is called for 24/7. That's our life. So a major problem in the church right now is that proper faith and reverence for the Eucharist. Every bishop throughout the world admits this. The solution is in witnessing and encouraging Eucharistic behavior on the part of those whose faith in the real presence is growing dim. That is how Christ wants to be present to them in the most real way. If they can't pull their behavior in line with the faith that they profess, nothing's going to happen. The problem is not an easy problem to correct. It's an easy problem to talk about. It's not an easy one to correct. We're talking about it, we're thinking about it, we're praying about it. Let's lovingly witness to the Eucharistic way of life, which alone gives final credibility to the real presence of Jesus Christ under the signs of bread and wine. Praise be Jesus Christ.